Wonderful to be back in Gmunden, wonderful to be back at the Academia Superior, and with my counterpart. You know, this is the Surprise Factors Symposium. And you had a surprise called Brexit, and we had a surprise called Donald Trump. Yeah, now I remember. And these two surprises really were the surprises of the last year, I think. So let me ask you, not what happened, but if you were to explain to the people who are here tonight what the message is that Brexit sends to Austria, to Europe, to the world, what's the message of Brexit?
Can I just say one thing, and that is, it was a huge surprise, even for somebody who voted for it. My wife and I went to bed about... Mic up. No, it's okay. It's okay, up. My wife and I went to bed about 11 o'clock. I said, darling, there's no point in staying up. It's a foregone conclusion. We've lost. I woke up about 6:45, 7 o'clock in the morning, went down to make a cup of tea for Rachel, and put on the television, and I just couldn't believe it. And I must say, I did say to myself in that sort of split second, whatever have we done? Because, you know, it was a real shock. If you say, what's the main message? I think the main message is that Britain, the United Kingdom, is not leaving Europe, but we are leaving Brussels. We are committed to a successful European Union without us. We don't want to see a European Union which is divisive, which is economically weak, and which has problems defending itself. So we feel we have every incentive to work in cooperation with Europe, but this time outside of the European Union. And if you say, what is the message? I mean, why did people vote for it? I think the reason they voted for it is they said, we want to take back control of immigration, and we want to take back control of our laws. We don't like some of the decisions of the European Court of Justice. We feel laws should be made in Britain by British people, defended in the courts, in the light of our judicial system, case law. And those two factors, this wasn't a racist, xenophobic, nativist, fascist response by the British people. The message was, we just wanted to govern ourselves.
So if you were to boil that down to a very short bumper sticker, the bumper sticker message to Europe is, leave us alone. We want to be independent of Brussels. What's the core DNA message about Brexit?
The core DNA message of Brexit, to me, is a nation state is still the fundamental political unit of Europe, and we don't want to be part of a super state.
Got it. Great. And let me follow that up with a second question, which is, Marcus asked Andrea, what's the optimistic scenario for doing what you do? How do you derive a sense of hope and positive future from the scenes you see? And a lot of people woke up not thinking that they were happy with the result, but in fact confused and maybe angry at the result. What's the optimistic upside of Brexit going forward? How do the rest of us who maybe didn't support Brexit, even though we weren't asked to vote, how do we come to a positive sense of what new possibilities have been opened up, rather than thinking this is a rejection of something? What is the positive affirmation?
I think the positive affirmation is we believe that we have a future as a free trading nation, countries like Australia, New Zealand, India, China, the US, and many other countries, that we believe in enterprise and in the enterprise economy, that we want to have less petty regulation. The Deputy Governor very eloquently argued, and small business in Britain is constantly arguing this point. We've just got too much regulation. And I think being freed of that and standing on our own feet, and frankly, although we've been in the EU for 43 years, it's not been a great marriage. And I think one of the saddest things I saw, I mean, although I was pro-Brexit, I had respect for David Cameron, but he went round the European capitals trying to get something to go back to the UK and say, the EU is prepared to do this deal. And of course, he came back with nothing. I think if he would have had something, the vote could well have turned out differently. But I'm still optimistic that we have a great future, and there is actually, in Britain at present, there's a new spring in our step, and there's a new sense of the air. It's almost like spring coming to Upper Austria. You just feel. And I should say, by the way, to the governor and the people of Upper Austria, this is a fantastic part of the world. I've never been here before. What's impressed me most of all is the hospitality of the people of Upper Austria. You have been so kind to us. Yeah, absolutely. Super.
All right.
Now, Alan, it's time I'm going to get my own back on you.
It's your turn to come my way.
Yeah. I know you ran as a Democratic governor for New Mexico, so I assume you're not a card-carrying Republican.
True.
But, and certainly for us, I think in Europe, the election of Mr. Trump was something, given the way he campaigned, something of a mystery. But what's the takeaway for us from what's happening?
From Trump? Well, I think if you step back from the particulars of the election and of Mr. Trump's personality and his own style, and you don't make it the politics of personality, I think if you were to stand back, you would say that the through line in America, the thing that makes America, is the subject of change. I don't think there's been a country in the history of the world that feels as much, as close to change as the United States. It is the dynamism of the United States. It is the spirit of the United States. It's the American dream, is that change is a part of our national character. But that said, if you look at the last at least 60 years, 70 years of American political history, there's been a back and forth about how we feel about change. So if you go back 8 years, President Obama ran on a platform, on a slogan, on a message of hope and change. And that if we worked together and we transcended division and we accepted each other for all of our differences, change would be our friend. And we would end up a better country for believing in change. I think 8 years later, the flip side emerged, and Mr. Trump campaigned on a message of fear and change, and that, in fact, we have a lot to be afraid of in the world, in the way of terror, in the way of other people who, as Andrea's photographs showed, don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't worship like us, and that we needed to have a very powerful counter-response to President Obama. And I think people go back and forth in general between wanting to believe the best is possible and that change will produce positive results for everyone, and then looking 8 years later and saying the gap between the rich and the poor is larger, not smaller. The sense of people being left behind by some of the forces that Michael Strugel talked about, technology, globalization, information overload, has overwhelmed people, and they feel left out and left behind and ignored and not listened to, and change isn't a friend to those people. It's a threat and a danger and a diminishment of their sense of possibility. And whether or not Donald Trump delivers on any of his promises or his extravagant claims that he'll bring back manufacturing to the United States, or he'll make coal a powerful energy source again, is less important than the emotional message, which was, you are right to be afraid, you're right to be angry, you're right to believe that you've been left behind, and I am going to acknowledge and respect your sense of anger. And so I think the United States has historically gone back and forth between a Franklin Roosevelt and a Herbert Hoover and a Lyndon Johnson and a Richard Nixon. And it is really the two sides of the American character, and we really need to own both sides of that story because they are both present in the American narrative, politically, socially, and economically.
Can I say, apart from emphasizing the fear, you know, the stock market in America, since he was elected, has done terribly well. He wants to reduce corporation tax for firms from 35% down to 20, 15. There's meant to be more than $1 trillion lying in bank accounts outside and in corporate balance sheets outside of America, which could come back. He sees, like has been said earlier this evening, some prospects for deregulation. He made what at least some people consider a moderately conservative appointment for the Supreme Court. I mean, I know you're a Democrat, but is there nothing possible? I mean, is there no hope with this man?
For Donald Trump? No, there's no hope for Donald Trump. I mean, I'm sorry. I know you're a vice chair of Goldman Sachs, and he appointed more Goldman Sachs people to his administration than any president in history, and so I'm sure you find him an admirable man.
Well.
But I think his policies are incoherent, inconsistent, and unworkable. But other than that, I think there's nothing wrong. But I would say, now, if you challenge... Thank you. I know there's a lot of concern. It's not a joke. It's a very concerning time when somebody who is the President of the United States doesn't believe that climate change and science are real. We are in serious trouble. He doesn't study the issues. He is almost studiously ignorant and maintains that as his sense of himself. But if you were to say to me what I asked you, what's the upside? The event has happened. We now need to find a way to come to terms with it. I think the positive thing that I see every day in the United States, and it may be the spring in the step of people in Britain as well, is a feeling that something we ignored for far too long and took for granted has to be attended to. And Andrea talked about trying to get people to pay attention to daily occurrences that we've learned to numb ourselves to. In the United States, I made my living for a long time writing about technological change, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and arguing that the future would be shaped by businesses that created a whole new set of possibilities. And I think that was true, but it was only half the story. The other half of the story is we need sound, sensible, forward-looking political and civic engagement. And too many people in the United States, and perhaps too many people in Britain, thought that the status quo was going to remain the status quo permanently and we could ignore it. We didn't have to tend to the political garden. It would take care of itself. And I think in the United States today, if any of you come visit America, you will be heartened by the revival of political discourse, civic engagement. There is now something in the United States called the Resistance, a formal movement to try to take on Mr. Trump and his policies that demean people who are poor and not white and who are suffering from political and economic disengagement. The Resistance is saying to Mr. Trump, you won the election, but you didn't win the longer issue, which is what is the underlying character of the United States. And so the healthiest thing of all, I believe, is not a candidate or a party. It is the quality of political engagement so that people believe that, in fact, their government and their country belongs to them and they have individual, personal, and community responsibility for making choices for a better future. And that Mr. Trump can take credit for.
Alan, I wonder if I can just say one thing.
Thank you.
I wonder if I can just say one thing before we finish, and that is a question that Alan has put to me repeatedly over the last 24 hours is, what are the takeaways from Brexit for Upper Austria? And I think one very important thing is this. If you look at the voting for Brexit, the most surprising thing about the voting was how many people from low-income backgrounds, from the northern industrial rust belts of Britain, from the West Midlands, from the Welsh previously mining valleys, areas of steelworks and so on, how many people in these areas voted for Brexit? And I think in a way it was a protest vote. And they were saying, we are not part of some internationally mobile set of people. We have been left out and we've been left behind. And frankly, we deserve better treatment than we've got. And I feel one of the major things on that basis in Britain is, in Upper Austria, some of your industries are going to become technologically redundant. People will become unemployed, maybe in midlife, with no obvious job opportunities. I think in Britain we've probably overinvested in universities and underinvested in technical education, practical education, so that people can face this constantly changing future. And if I was to advise the Upper Austrian government to be asked that question, I would say and I certainly say the British government, putting more resources into this area for the future of our children and grandchildren so that we don't have a permanent underclass developing is absolutely a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would put a capstone on that by saying the real through line for both your surprise and my surprise in the United States is the issue of leadership and what does leadership look like. And there's a famous professor at the Kennedy School named Ronnie Heifetz who is quoted as saying, too many leaders die with their mouths open. And the lesson there is that, and from your point about who voted for Brexit and who voted for Donald Trump, is that one of the key arts of leadership is listening, not talking, and listening to people who feel they are voiceless and ignored. And if we do want to control or have a sense of control in a period of time when things threaten to spiral out of control, the real core skill will be listening, attentiveness, and respect, and then responses that take into account human concerns at the level where really real people actually live and work and try to have a better life. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.